The inventory of sins begins not under the Klieg lights, but under the cold buzzing fluorescent of a Michigan police station. Graduation night, 1986. The charge breaking and entering. The target her own high school. A prank that curdled into a police record. Her classmates had voted her most likely to be arrested. A prophecy fulfilled with grim, almost theatrical precision. This was not the act of a future icon. It was the desperate signal flare of a girl already in therapy since the age of 14. A girl whose rebellion smelled less of teenage freedom and more of a quiet, simmering panic before the void. The official narrative would later reduce the charge to trespassing, a neat bit of paperwork to sanitize the past, like wiping blood from a marble floor. But the file remains. That night was the first crack in the porcelain facade she would later perfect for global consumption. It was a raw, unscripted performance that revealed the central conflict of her entire existence. A fierce intelligence trapped in a cage of expectation, rattling the bars just to feel something real. The ambition was already there, a hungry ghost wanting out. But it was tangled with a self-destructive impulse, a need to test the very foundations of her world before she could build her own empire of illusion. This arrest wasn't a fatal mistake. It was a diagnostic. The first piece of evidence in a lifelong audit of the soul, proving that before she could play characters haunted by the unknown, she first had to confront the chaos that lived under her own skin. The verdict of her youth was not guilty. It was pause unstable. The contract for the X-Files was not a lottery ticket. It was a verdict delivered on studio letterhead. 9 years, 16-hour days, a life exchanged for a legacy. Dana Scully became a global totem for skepticism and intellect, a beacon in the murky waters of 90s paranoia. But for Джиллиан Андерсон, it was the construction of a gilded cage, bar by golden bar. The fame was a sudden, violent weather system she had no tools to navigate. The meat grinder of glory began its work, separating the person from the persona with brutal efficiency. While the world saw an icon, the studio saw a line item. For 3 seasons, she was paid half of what her male co-star earned, a fact that sits in the case file like a shard of glass in a wound. She was the narrative and emotional heart of the show, but her value was discounted by 50%. The fight for parity was her first real war, fought not against aliens, but against men in suits who saw her as a secondary, replaceable asset. She won. But every victory in that world has a price etched in acid. Her first marriage dissolved under the pressure, a casualty of a schedule that respected no personal boundaries. Her daughter grew up on set, her childhood backdropped by artificial autopsies and talk of conspiracies. Anderson built a legacy out of exhaustion and righteous fury. She became Scully, and in the process, a part of Gillian was placed in a digital coffin, forever preserved as a 25-year-old FBI agent. The world owned her image, a ghost in the pop culture machine. The price of becoming a household name was the slow, methodical erasure of her own private self. An inventory of the heart reveals a pattern of controlled demolition. 2 marriages, both dismantled. A long-term partnership with Peter Morgan, the creator of The Crown where she played Thatcher, also concluded. A brief reconciliation, then the final verdict. It's a biography written in departures. The public record shows a daughter, Piper Maru, from the first union with an art director. Then 2 sons, Oscar and Felix, from the second with a businessman. The math is simple. The emotional calculus is brutal. This isn't the chaos of a Hollywood starlet. This is the meticulous, almost surgical severing of ties. A life lived in chapters, each ending with a closed door. The real secret isn't the whispered about high school girlfriend, a fact she confirmed with the casual air of someone discussing the weather. The real story is the therapy. Since the age of 14. A lifelong audit of the soul. An attempt to reinforce the walls before the next inevitable tremor. She speaks of anxiety and depression not as a confession, but as a clinical diagnosis of her own condition. It's the price of a consciousness that never switches off. Each relationship, a new hypothesis. Each breakup, a data point in a decades-long study of the self. The mangled fate is not in the failures, but in the relentless, cold analysis of them. It suggests a person forever standing outside their own life, taking notes. The Salt Path. A prestige project, an adaptation of an inspiring memoir starring A-list talent. A guaranteed pillar in the legacy wing. Then, the whispers turn to headlines. Allegations of fabrication. The entire foundation of the story threatened with collapse. The project becomes an anchor, not a sail, dragging her name into the murky waters of public doubt. This is the anatomy of the fall, in miniature. It casts a long shadow over her other ventures, each a calculated move to control the narrative. The book, Want, a curatorial effort to catalog the desires of others. The beverage line, G-Spot, an attempt to literally bottle and sell a feeling. Even the noble activism becomes part of this portfolio. Each is a brick in the empire of self-determination. But the Salt Path affair is the verdict. It proves that legacy is not built, it is granted, and it can be revoked without warning. The final exhibit in this chapter of decline paused January 2026. News breaks that the Netflix series The Abandons, another high-profile vehicle, is canceled after a single season. Not a bang, but the quiet click of a server shutting down. The wreckage of the empire grows. The inheritance is not glory, but the bitter taste of doubt. The G-Spot dossier. An actress accumulates a career of critical acclaim, a fortress built of prestige television and stage awards. Then she pivots, not to directing, not to a passion project funded by a streaming giant. She decides to sell soft drinks. On the surface, it appears to be a baffling detour, a footnote in a storied career. But the file suggests this is not a whim. It is a calculated act of rebellion. The brand name itself, G-Spot, is a provocation, a deliberate piece of commercial friction designed to chafe against the sterile, sexless branding of wellness culture. This is not about hydration. It is a carbonated manifesto, a public audit of pleasure served cold. The venture launched in April 2023, a quiet declaration of war against the expected. Parallel to this, another file. The 2024 publication of Want, a collection of anonymous female fantasies. Not a memoir, not a novel, an inventory of unsanitized desire. Anderson becomes a curator of secrets, a role she understands better than most. Both projects are of a piece. They are a continuation of the girl voted most likely to be arrested, a descent against the gilded cage of being a serious actress. The risk is substantial. Commercial failure is one thing. The dilution of a carefully crafted brand is another. Each consoled, each book opened is a gamble. It's a test of whether her cultural capital can be liquidated for something more tangible, more, honest. The dossier concludes this is not a midlife crisis. It is a final, public reckoning with the persona she was expected to maintain. A legacy play, written in the language of commerce and carnal truth. Anatomy of a Scandal. The project was supposed to be unimpeachable, a film adaptation of The Salt Path, the best-selling memoir of resilience and hope. A-list talent, a celebrated director, and a story that was pure awards bait. Gillian Anderson's attachment was a seal of quality, a guarantee of gravitas. The machinery of prestige was in full motion, but a shadow fell across the production. A long, creeping doubt that began as whispers and grew into damning headlines. The source material, the very foundation of the inspiring tale, was now under public scrutiny. Allegations of fabrication. The narrative began to unravel. This is the anatomy of a fatal error. Not an error in performance, but in due diligence. The integrity of the film became inextricably tied to a story that was, according to a growing chorus, a carefully constructed lie. For an actress whose career is a monument to intelligence and discernment, the association is a significant blow. It is collateral damage from a war over truth she did not start, but is now a part of. The film, slated for a 2025 release, is no longer just a story about a walk. It is now a case study in the precarious contract between art and reality. The public reception is compromised before the first ticket is sold. The verdict is already being written, not by critics, but by the scandal itself. This file documents the wreckage. A prestige project, poisoned at the source. A reminder that in the architecture of a legacy, one cracked foundation can compromise the entire structure. Can we still believe her? Her response was not silence. It was a calculated flurry of activity, a portfolio of futures designed to bury the past under the weight of new narratives. First, the escape into the abstract. Tron Ares. A world of clean data streams and neon grids, a universe scrubbed clean of messy, inconvenient truths. It is a strategic retreat into a realm where belief is not required, only spectacle. The perfect anesthetic for a reputation suffering from a very human wound. Then, the return to familiar ground, the crime thriller Animals. Here, she is back in the shadows, the territory of flawed saviors and moral ambiguity she commands so well. It is a reminder of her power, a flexing of old muscles in a genre where deceit is part of the script, not a behind-the-scenes expose. This is her fortress. But the real gamble lies elsewhere. In the quiet ambition of literary adaptations like the Julia set and Trespasses. Here she attempts to reclaim the moral high ground, to align herself with stories of proven, printed integrity. It is an attempt to perform a transfusion, swapping the tainted blood of a fabricated memoir for the pure lineage of celebrated fiction. Each project is a carefully placed brick in a wall meant to hold back the tide of public memory. A desperate, brilliant piece of reputation management played out on the world stage. Yet, the industry delivers its own cold verdicts. The cancellation of the Netflix Western The Abandons after a single season serves as a brutal counterpoint. A reminder that even for an icon, the algorithm is the ultimate arbiter. It is a judgment rendered not in a courtroom, but in a boardroom, and it is just as final. The future for Gillian Anderson is now a frantic construction project, an attempt to build a monument so vast and impressive that it casts a shadow long enough to obscure the ghosts of the recent past. The question is whether she is building a new empire or simply a more elaborate, more beautiful mausoleum.